Good everyone. I hope you're having an amazing day. So, welcome to another episode of Trigger Framework. So, today I'm going to talk about Fflib Trigger Framework. So, you can do a way beyond Trigger when it comes to Fflib-apex-common. So, this is models based on an enterprise design pattern. So, you have domain controller, selected class, application layer, service layer. So, but that being said, right, I know it can be an overwhelming. It is a complex um, design pattern, so you need to have a basic understanding of about an enterprise design architecture. But that being said, I'll try to make it simple. I try to cover only from a trigger point of view. I'm not going to talk about from an other Apex customization, right? Okay, the first thing first, go to this GitHub page. I uh, put this link in the description below, so don't worry about it. So you don't have to write it down, right? So you go to this GitHub page, right? So so you can read about it. So like you say, like I said, about this library, talk about service layer, selector layer, domain layer, and you can install this, right? So before you install this, right, it talks about Apex Mock. So it's about writing your Apex test classes. So it comes with a mock, which makes it very easy for you to write your own Apex test class, right? So so go to this GitHub, right? First install the Apex mocks. Once you install this, you come back here, right? And you can install this common. But that being said, I would highly encourage you to install one more. That is Apex a common sample code, right? It will give you a head start, right? You can look at, say, for instance, how to write a selector class, right? How to write a domain class, right? How to write a service layer, right? So it's important that you get this source to your local machine and start practicing it, right? This is an amazing enterprise design pattern, right? It will make sure that every developers who are using this specific library, will comply to a common standard. Usually, why do we need a trigger framework? Right? I talked about when I first talked about the trigger framework first episode, right? Because you are a vendor. Let's say you're working for a customer, right? And the customer has different vendors, right? And now one vendor can introduce their own coding standard, right? They say, okay, we're going to use the handler this way, we're going to use the handler that way. Another vendor, will say, okay, since the trigger is, very short, why don't we write a business logic within the trigger? I know it's a bad practice, but trust me, I've seen a code like that before, right? So just to keep everything consistent, right? It's better to have a framework in place, right? So that's one of the reasons why I think that this financial force trigger framework is fantastic compared to the other framework I talked about, right? Though you can argue that nonprofit is good as well, but if you wanted to do way beyond trigger, if you wanted to use this as a general Apex coding standard, then this is a mind-blowing framework. Okay, all right, let's dive into the code, and I'll show you, how to create I've written a code, so I'll just walk you through. Um, so So this is my normal trigger handler, right? If you can see, this is my normal trigger, right? So let me maximize the window. Excuse me. So as you can see that this is a very basic trigger syntax, right? You have trigger, and contact, and I have included every trigger context here, right? Before insert, after insert, pretty much everything. And this is where the things get very, things get very interesting. So fflib as subject domain, the trigger handler. Okay, so this is a method which is associated with the fflib-common, and excuse me, this is a weather change and got a sore throat, so my apologies. So you need to build your own handler class. So this is a connect ff handler. That's the name I've given. You can give a meaningful name. So I'm demonstrating specifically from a contact perspective. You can write it for an account. You can write it for a custom object. So pretty much any object. Okay. So fflib s-domain.trigger handler. So in that you have to write a trigger handler. So this is the handler. So as you can see that I'm extending from fflib domain, and so this is a domain class, right? So this is it comes with the code. It's not written by me, so this is a Financial Force. Andy and his team. I mean, when Andy used to work for Financial Force, I think they built this one, and so you can read about it. You see, it talks about the financialforce.com, right? The copyright. It's an open source, right? You can modify it based on your business needs, right? So this is object domain. They got a lot of methods here, trigger methods. So go through it, at your free time. So what I've done, I've extended this handler from this F domain, and don't worry about this one for now. This is a local class, so don't worry about it. Okay. So this is a normal constructor, right? And this is another one. Okay. So this is like you doing a dependency injection here. So we are actually implementing S domain I constructible, and if you don't implement this one, right, you will get an exception. So, and in this case, you are passing this record, so that is it has a construct and then it's returning this one. Okay, that's pretty much it. So and then we have on before insert, after before insert, sorry, not after before insert, after insert, on after insert. So you got, if you wanted to handle trigger operations using methods, right, and this is pretty handy, right? You have to override, say, so for instance, if I wanted to do public, override void on after, sorry, on after insert, you can do that, right? And you can write your code here, okay? So if you wanted to do on before update, you can do that as well. On after update, you can do that as well. So you have a control over handler using a method, right? It's not like a cluttered code where you say if trigger dot insert or trigger dot is after whatever. So that's kind of a clunky and ugly looking code. That's my personal opinion, but I mean I prefer a method based event so you can control it. So this is the way you can do that. So this is why I said, a trigger framework is very handy. So if another development team comes into picture, right? Let's say another vendor. Okay, so whatever vendor name is, right? A big vendor, whatever the vendors they have out there, fancy vendors, right? So they wanted to implement, say, on before insert, right? So they can pretty much, do public override void on before without fiddling with any of the code, right? Otherwise, imagine, if you have a handler, then you have to do if, else, if trigger dot this, trigger dot that, right? They might break an existing code, right? There might be possibility, right? So you have to be pessimistic when it comes to the code reviews, right? You always assume that a developer would have broken something, right? Otherwise, if you're optimistic about the code review, you might slip in the bug in production, right? That's my approach. Whenever I do a code review, I always assume the developer has done a bad job, right? Sorry, no offense, but just want to make sure that you put the best quality out there. Okay, so this is what you do, right? Now that's all great. Okay, now what happens, right? If you wanted to query a database, okay, sometimes you might have to say get the data from say an object from a table from a table, right, which is an object in Salesforce, right? If you wanted to say query say an account, or you want to query custom object, right? So how do you write a query? You can't write something like this, right? Say for instance, you know, the normal operation what we normally tend to do, right? Account A equals to, right, select ID name from account where whatever, something like that, right? But if you're using a financial force, you have to use a selector class, right? The reason why you need to use a selector, because so that your account query will always belongs to one specific class, right? It won't be scattered across the 50 places. Like, let's say if I wanted to, so in this scenario, what will happen is you're querying an account from one place, okay? You might be using a similar kind of query in another place, okay? Or the other scenario, what you might do is that you might create a utility class. But imagine utility class with like thousands of queries and thousands of other methods which got nothing to do with the queries, right? It's like a jumbled up approach. So in that perspective, right, keeping that into consideration, a selector class is very handy. So I've done something very similar, right? So what happens is you create a class, okay, and you extend from Fflib selector, right, which implements this, which this is something you have to build, right? This is like an interface, okay? I mean, you should understand what interface is about if you're going to use this um, design pattern, right? Without understanding interfaces, you can't use it because it's full of interfaces, okay? So you create an interface, right, which is pretty much the similar name of your class. Only difference is I put an I before, right? And you write a method, right, which you will implement it, okay? And then you have, don't worry about this for now, okay? I'll explain you in a second. And then you have this new instance, right? Static.new instance, which actually comes from Fflib. And then you have something like this. You do, selector dot not new instance. So, and what is this trigger.config? This is the name of your object. So if you're dealing with an account, you will do account here. So the way the naming convention works, usually you can write something like account selector, okay? If the name of an object, after that you can write selector, okay? So in this case, if I'm dealing with account, I would write so account selector extends Fflib selector implements I account selector, okay? And then in this case, right, so the reason why I've used Fflib trigger is the name of a custom object, okay? So that's why I have Fflib trigger. It's a name of a custom object. So Fflib trigger config, right? So this is the name of a custom object. So as you can see, so in this case, I'm using a new instance, and then I'm passing this name of a object dot s object type, okay? And now this is the schema, right? Get object type, and these are the list of schema where you put the name of the fields, right? These are the name of the fields which you want to return, which you want to play with. So you have to put the name of the fields here. And then this is how I actually get a value from a table or from an object, okay? So what I'm doing is, in this case, there's something called, okay, it sounds a bit wacky, okay? So we have something called new query factory. I know that you might be looking at it and say, oh, holy crap, this is too complicated. Yeah, it is a bit complicated though. I mean, I do understand that. I do acknowledge it. It is a bit complicated. If you haven't used an enterprise design pattern before, you will think it's way too complicated. But that being said, right, don't get scared away from things which are complicated. The more you get into complex stuff, right, the more you get recognized, the more stuff you learn. That's what I believe, right? If you're scared of it like a chicken, right, thinking, oh, it's too complicated, it's not my cup of tea, someone else will do it, right? And the person will think, why should we keep you, right? You're not even capable of understanding stuff, right? So, you have to think. That's what I learned. That's the advice my mentor gave me when I was starting, all right? Don't shy away from stuff, right? You know, be open-minded, right? Be open about new stuff and new challenges, right? So I know that this is kind of tricky. So the new query factory. So what we're doing here, okay? So we are building a query factory. So if you know how the factory method works, I talked about the factory method. I put the factory method in the description in the I button. So just watch how the factory methods work, a factory design pattern works, so you will understand it. So I'm building a excuse me, excuse me. Oh, so this is so I'm getting an instance of Fflib query factory, right? So, and then I'm doing the set conditions. So conditions like, so these are the methods which comes like, where clause, the set condition. So now what is condition? Okay. So if you look at the condition here, in this case, right, there is no condition. I'm not passing any condition here. So that's blank. And the limit, and there's only one limit, right? And so usually what you can actually do, you can pretty much do this, right? Because number of limits. I mean, I hard code it to one, but usually, if I'm using a method, it should be limits means, right? It's think about from a SQL query, right? Select ID from an account, limit, one means return once. If you put limit two, limit two. Condition is like the condition. Okay, and now you get the database to a query. So dot to SQL will make a SQL statement for you. Okay, now let me put something here. Okay, so this will make it more clear. Okay, so condition, right? So condition is like a where clause in simple terms, right? So you have select ID from account where name equals to something, right? So that is exactly what condition is. Okay, I'm putting this where name equals to this, and then right, and then this is pretty much it. So that's why I said, please go and install that, the one which I talked about, this one, common sample code. Go through it, practice it. The more you practice, the more you understand, right? I mean, I might cover financial force lib entire series, but the plan is once I finish the trigger framework, I wanted to talk about identity. Maybe after that, I will talk about it, right? Okay, so this is all good, right? Now, how do you use this class? Say, for instance, I wanted to use this methods in a domain class controller. How do you use it? Okay, so for that matter, you will do something like that. You will create an application selector, right? This is a selector factory, so you need to create a selector factory because you have to put this into selector factory. So that's what I did. I put this into selector factory, and then when I go to a domain, you know, so let me see where I've used it first of all. Hang on a second. Before insert, I'll use it somewhere. Yeah. See, this is how I use. Excuse me. Config selector dot new instance dot get trigger type list. So this is the method. That's the method. Where is it? Get trigger type list. This is how I use. So you should not be mixing and matching up the stuff, right? This is why enterprise design pattern is very powerful. You can do stuff in the form of layers. I mean, I've used enterprise design pattern not on the Salesforce space, mostly on the ERP system, right? It's exactly similar what I've used. We got a selective class, we had a domain controller which deals with the domain controller normally deals with your in this case, especially in this context, right? We're talking about trigger perspective. It mostly deals about all kind of trigger operations like on, before, after insert, after delete, before update, after update, right? That kind of operations in a form of a method. So the domain controller deals with it, right? So I was saying that when I used to work on the .NET platform, right? We used to have an ERP system, pretty complex ERP systems. ERP systems are extremely complicated. I mean, if you have ever used SAP, I mean, I don't like SAP because the interface sucks, right? It's looked like a primitive system. I know people who worked on SAP HANA would think, "Oh no, what are you talking about? It's amazing." I know that if you've been using SAP for like 10, 15 years, you would be extremely passionate about it. I'm not, right? I haven't used SAP much. I've used bits and pieces of it. I don't really like it. I've used another ERP product which is much better than SAP, but at the same time, that system is way too geeky as well. I mean, if you are if you're a person who's not much into IT, you will struggle big time. So that being said, right, the product has been written in an enterprise design style. They started with with old technologies, then they rewrote a lot of stuff, and they bought a lot of enterprise design pattern. And what happened after that, any kind of customization, right, which you wanted to do on top of it, it was like very easy way to do so, right? If you have a tightly coupled system, right, very tightly coupled, then making a changes to it very difficult, right? The reason why I'm talking about coupling, right, because especially in terms of this design pattern, right, you will have two different classes which is totally decoupled, right? And if you wanted to make changes to one, you can do without breaking another. So that's why I said that this Fflib is very powerful, and you should understand, right? If you're a developer or an architect, you should have a strong understanding about enterprise design parent. That's my personal opinion, right? So, because I've seen so many architects, right? They pretend to be an architect, but their knowledge is way too limited. I just don't understand, right? Because I've seen in Salesforce space, and no offense to anyone, they take a certification, they think they're an architect. That's not how it works, right? You need to have at least 6 to 7 years experience in architecture space before you even call yourself as an architect, right? Developers are not architects. There are certain things developers don't do, right? Architects have a why mindset. They always look at things from a 50 thousand feet high, and then they come once they ask why, then they come with how. I mean, I'm not blaming. I'm not saying, hey, you're a developer, you're not an architect. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that you can't be an architect without but just by taking a certification, right? That's one of the biggest annoyance I see in the Salesforce space. Someone say, oh, look, I become an architect because I cleared the certification. That's not how it works. It's like, let me give you an analogy, right? You take a certification about flying, right, without actually flying. Would you become a pilot? Absolutely not. I won't fly with you. Hell no. you know, I would rather prefer to fly with a pilot who has like 5 to 6 years of flying experience rather than having just freaking certification, right? And no flying experience. I won't bloody go anywhere near to that plane. So that's the same analogy I'm trying to say. If you need to understand, you need to ask why I have to use, right? So that's why the why question is extremely important, right? Till you don't ask why, you can never become a good programmer or an architect, right? So, sorry for ranting, but I just wanted to put that perspective across. Right. That being said, I hope you enjoyed today's session. So I know that's a bit overwhelming, but just go through it. More you practice, more you understand. Ask questions. There are different user groups out there. Who talks about. I think there's a UK user group who talks about financial force lib. So check it out. You might get more value out of it. Right. That being said, have a great Friday. Cheers. Adios.